Padre Pio saw many things. Some he spoke about, others he only whispered. Visions of heaven, encounters with angels, battles with the devil himself. But near the end of his life, Padre Pio began to change. His letters became heavier, his prayers more urgent, and in the silence of his final years, he shared something with only a few close to him. A vision, one that has never been fully explained, one that may have remained hidden until now. He described a figure dressed in white, walking through a broken and silent church, not as a ruler, but as a man carrying something too heavy to name. He walked alone through ruins, not in glory but in grief, and Padre Pio, usually direct, refused to say what the vision truly meant. "It is not yet time," he said, "but the one who comes will not be understood until everything has already begun." Now, decades later, the world has turned its eyes to a new pope, Pope Leo XIV. Unexpected, quiet, unshaken, but those who know prophecy, who remember the visions, who still feel Padre Pio's presence in their prayers, can't help but ask, was this the man he saw? In this video, we'll explore the details of Padre Pio's final vision. We'll uncover what the figure in white represented, and why Pope Leo XIV may be far more than just a new leader. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might change how you see this pope, and how you understand what's coming next. To the world, Padre Pio was a mystic, a miracle worker, a man marked by God. But to those closest to him, he was a man who carried secrets. Visions didn't come to him as gentle whispers. They struck him violently, clearly, and often painfully. He once said, "God allows me to see too much, and sometimes I ask him to take it away." Many of his revelations were shared openly. Souls in purgatory visiting him, battles with the devil in his cell, prophecies about world war and moral collapse. But not all of them were made public. In letters to his spiritual director, some only released after his death, Padre Pio described visions he refused to explain. He spoke of a time when the church would no longer hear, when its walls would still stand, but the light inside would dim. He saw images of a church covered in dust, and of a man in white, walking through silence. But when asked about the man, he would not answer directly. "He is not who they will expect," Padre Pio wrote, "and he will not speak until the silence is complete." Some believe this was symbolic, a metaphor for spiritual dryness. But others, especially those who studied Pio's patterns, believe he was describing a real person, someone who would rise, not in glory, but in a moment of deep global confusion, someone who would carry the title of Pope, but not the role people had come to expect, someone who would be seen by the world, but understood only by the soul. Padre Pio warned that many of his visions would only make sense in another time, that the seeds he was planting would not bloom for decades. And now, the bloom may have begun. Padre Pio never dramatized his visions. He didn't seek awe, he sought truth. And yet, there was one vision he described that haunted even those closest to him. It came during a night of prayer, sometime in the early 1960s. He had been unusually quiet that week, withdrawn, restless. And then, after a long silence, he shared what he had seen. A church in ruins, not destroyed by fire or bombs, but by neglect. Its walls stood tall, but its soul was missing. The pews were empty, the altar cracked, candles flickered weakly, their flames bending inward. And walking through this silence was a man in white, not triumphant, not radiant, but burdened. His face was soft but heavy, his eyes cast downward. He moved slowly, as if every step carried the weight of centuries. Padre Pio described how this man did not speak. He did not turn. He simply walked, as though guided by something invisible, as though he was not there to rebuild, but to witness. "I saw him touch the walls," Padre Pio said, "not to strengthen them, but to feel their sorrow." And around him, the wind whispered. Voices long silenced seemed to cry out from the stones. But the man didn't weep. He simply listened and kept walking. The vision ended with one final moment. The man paused before the altar. He looked up, not a heaven, but into the shadows above the crucifix. Then he knelt, not in power, but in surrender. Padre Pio never said who this man was. He never claimed to know, but he did say this. He is the one who will come when the church has forgotten what it is, and he will remind them, not with words, but with presence. Some believed it was a symbolic dream. Others feared it was the image of a future pope. But one thing was certain, this man was not there to save. He was there to stand in the silence and be the sign for those still able to feel it, and in a world full of noise. His silence was more powerful than any sermon. When Pope Leo XIV appeared for the first time, many watching around the world were confused. He wasn't a media favorite. He wasn't one of the expected names. He wasn't known for political power or captivating speeches. He simply stepped forward, quiet, measured, still. He said little, smiled even less. And yet, for many, something stirred. It wasn't his words that mattered. It was his presence. Observers noted how unusual it was, how the moment didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a shift, like the start of something not entirely joyful, but deeply significant. And for those who remembered the vision Padre Pio once described, something about Pope Leo XIV felt familiar. A man in white, chosen at a time when faith is eroding, not rising. When churches are still standing, but half empty. When the soul of the church feels fragile. Leo XIV walks with a gravity that can't be explained through politics. He speaks with long pauses. He avoids the spotlight. He resists the typical pageantry. And his name, Leo, the lion, a symbol of both authority and judgment. A name that hadn't been used by a pope in over a century. It felt deliberate, ancient, prophetic. Some theologians have already begun whispering. He may not be here to lead the church forward, but to stand at its threshold as it confronts its own soul. Like the man in Pio's vision, Leo XIV has stepped into a hollowed structure, not to build, but to bear witness, to carry the weight of generations, to feel the walls, to walk among ruins and not turn away. He is not charismatic. He is not a reformer. He is a mirror, reflecting the emptiness many feel inside their faith and silently asking, what have we become? And just like the man in the vision, he does not accuse. He does not explain. He walks slowly, deliberately into the silence. And for those who remember Padre Pio's warning, it no longer feels like coincidence. It feels like fulfillment. Not all prophecies are meant to be spoken aloud. Some are planted like seeds, buried in silence, waiting for the right season to rise. Padre Pio knew this. He carried visions he didn't fully explain. Sometimes he would say, God shows me things not for the moment, but for when the soul is ready. He understood that timing was sacred, that speaking too soon could blind people instead of opening their eyes. So when he described a figure in white walking through ruins, he said only enough to stir questions, never answers. Those close to him would ask, who is this man? When will this happen? And Padre Pio would reply, when the silence is complete, when even the faithful stop listening. For decades, those words sat quietly in old letters, archives, and testimonies passed between friars. Ignored, misunderstood, even dismissed, because no one could imagine a time when the church would be full of light, but empty inside. No one believed a pope could come, not to build, but to mourn, not to reign, but to observe. Until now. Now, with the world unraveling, with spiritual authority weakened, with tradition growing hollow, his vision makes more sense than ever. It's not just about the man in white. It's about the timing of his arrival. Pope Leo XIV did not rise in triumph. He rose in silence, at a moment when believers feel more lost than led. When even within the church, many no longer feel the presence they once trusted. And that's exactly what Pio seemed to describe. A time when the ruins wouldn't be physical, but spiritual. A time when the last sign wouldn't come with trumpets, but with a man who says very little, and yet speaks volumes through his stillness. That kind of figure wouldn't make sense in the 1960s, or even the 1980s. But today, it fits. And perhaps Padre Pio knew that. Perhaps that's why he held the vision so close. Not out of fear, but out of obedience. Because sometimes the voice of God is not meant for the past. It's meant for the generation who needs it most. And maybe that generation is ours. In every era of spiritual transition, there's a figure who stands between what was and what must come. Padre Pio called him the shepherd who does not call, but gathers. Someone whose role is not to rule with strength, but to remain present while the world unravels. Some believe this idea was symbolic, but others, mystics, visionaries, and even saints have spoken of a final pastor, a man who would not lead the church to a new golden age, but walk with it through a valley of shadows. The prophecy of Saint Malachi, written centuries ago, echoes this mystery. A long list of popes ending with a chilling final line. In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, and he will feed the flock through many tribulations, after which the city of 7 hills shall be destroyed. For centuries, scholars debated its meaning. Was it allegory, or was it a warning? Some tried to identify this Peter the Roman through bloodlines or names, but others took a different approach. What if the final pope would not be recognized by logic, but by feeling? By the weight he carries, by the silence that surrounds him, by the way the world becomes spiritually disoriented the moment he rises. And that's exactly what's happening now. Pope Leo XIV has no scandal, no war, no revolution. But since his election, the air has changed. There's a growing unrest, a return of old prophecies, a trembling in the souls of those who have spent a lifetime in faith, and suddenly feel as though they're standing at the edge of something sacred and final. Could he be the shepherd Padre Pio saw? Not a savior, not a destroyer, but a silent witness, chosen to walk with the church as it confronts the truth about itself. Padre Pio wrote once, "The final one will be misunderstood, not because of what he says, but because of what he represents." Perhaps Pope Leo XIV was not chosen to rebuild the church. Perhaps he was chosen to accompany it to the end of one age and the beginning of something no one can fully see. Not a man of change, not a man of comfort, but the last shepherd who stays when others flee. The one who waits, not for power, but for the arrival of what was always promised. Pope Leo XIV now stands at the head of a church in crisis. He wears white, but not with glory. He speaks, but not to impress. He leads, but not in the way the world expected. And for those who remember the vision of Padre Pio, his presence feels less like a choice and more like a signal. There are moments in history when someone enters quietly, and yet their very existence changes the course of time. Maybe Leo XIV wasn't chosen by man. Maybe his name wasn't just symbolic. Maybe his arrival was not the beginning of something great, but the final echo of a prophecy whispered decades ago. Padre Pio didn't live to see this day, but he saw something, a figure in white, a church in ruins, a silence heavy with divine meaning. And now we see that figure, not in a dream, but on the balcony of St. Peter's, real, present, and utterly still. He may not be here to restore. He may not be here to reign, but maybe he is here to witness, to stand at the threshold of the unknown, and remind the faithful that not every message is shouted. Some are sent in silence. And perhaps that is why Padre Pio said nothing more, because he knew that someday we would understand, without him having to say a word.